Hello, this is Chris Rodriguez from National Disability Institute. I want to welcome everybody for today's webinar, ABLE Funds, Understanding the Investment Side of ABLE. I'm going to be helping out moderating, and then we're going to be joined by Mr. Michael Morris, our Executive Director of the National Disability Institute. I want to go ahead and turn it over to our individual that's going to help us with some technical assistance questions, but before I do that, I do want to remind everybody and show some appreciation to Bank of America. This webinar is brought to you by the ABLE National Resource Center and sponsored by Bank of America, so thank you so much for that.
Good afternoon, everyone. The audio for today's webinar is being broadcast through your computer. Please make sure your speakers are turned on or your headphones are plugged in. You can control the audio broadcast via the audio broadcast panel. If you accidentally close this panel, you can reopen it by going to the Communicate menu at the top of the screen and choosing Audio Broadcast. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer, or if you prefer to listen by phone, you can dial the toll or toll-free number that you see here and enter the meeting code. Please note that you do not need to enter an attendee ID. Real-time captioning is provided during this webinar. The captions can be found in the Media Viewer panel, which appear in the lower right-hand corner of the webinar platform. If you'd like to make the Media Viewer panel larger, you can do so by minimizing some of the other panels you see, like chat or Q&A. And conversely, if you do not need and do not want to see the captions, you can go ahead and minimize the Media Viewer panel. I will also paste a link in the chat box with a link to the captions if you prefer to view them in a browser, in an external browser. We will have some time for questions during the webinar. Please use the Q&A box to submit any questions that you have, and we will direct those questions to the speakers accordingly. If you are listening to the webinar by phone only and you'd like to submit a question, you can do so by emailing that question to me, Nakia Matthews, at nmatthews@ndi-inc.org. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and the materials will be available on the ABLE NRC website at the link here, and I'll also paste the link in the chat box. And finally, if you experience any technical difficulties during this webinar, please use the chat box to send NDI admin a message, or you can email me directly at nmatthews@ndi-inc.org. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
Okay, thank you so much, Nakia. Before we get started here, I just wanted to introduce our presenters. Today, the two gentlemen that will be presenting the majority of the presentation, we'll start out with John Nadwarny, who is the Special Needs Financial Planning, a specialty practice to Shepherd Financial Partners. John is a certified financial planner, professional, and a recognized thought leader in the field of planning for families of individuals with special needs. He's also the father of James, a 25-year-old young man with Down syndrome. John and his business partner, Cynthia Haddad, founded Special Needs Financial Planning in '95. At the time, there was little information and almost no guidance available for families like their own to plan for the future of their family member with a disability. As a result, John and Cynthia wrote the book, The Special Needs Planning Guide, published by Brooks Publishing. We're very happy to have John with us today. In addition to John, we have Mark Fries, who's Senior Vice President of Wealth Management Advisor, and Portfolio Manager, Menick Fries Group. Mark is a wealth management advisor based in Washington, D.C. He has helped clients create strategies for their financial future since he joined Merrill Lynch in 1987. Mark is a frequent speaker and has conducted seminars covering financial strategies, education funding, tax minimization strategies, special needs planning and estate planning services for many institutions, corporations, associations, retirement communities, and professional groups. He's appeared on local TV and cable and helps with a radio show focused on elder care and special needs financial strategies. Mark has also worked with the boards of many local companies and associations to help them develop cohesive and holistic approaches to move forward their financial goals. So I want to say thank you so much to both Mark and John. We also have an incredible group of panelists that we're going to be getting to a little later to give their perspective on some of the information that we're going to hear and to give their experience in terms of choosing their ABLE program and how they felt about choosing the various investment options that they ended up choosing. So, to get started, I just want to go over our agenda very quickly. We're going to go over some of the key characteristics of ABLE. While the majority of this webinar is going to focus on the investment side of ABLE, we do want to dedicate just a couple slides to give you a very brief background of the ABLE Act and some key characteristics under ABLE. We would encourage you to go to the ABLE National Resource Center and go to some of our previous webinars that are archived there, or some of the informational videos we have that go into much greater detail about the common characteristics and different components of the ABLE Act, including eligibility criteria, determining what a qualified expense is, understanding the Medicaid payback provision, understanding contribution limits and things like that. We're not going to go into the details, but we will give a very, very brief couple slides on those so you have a basic understanding. After that, we're going to go into the bulk of the presentation, which is going to be concerning understanding ABLE as an investment account. And then we're going to get to hear from those panelists that I just mentioned about their experience in terms of choosing, in terms of number one, choosing an ABLE program, and number two, choosing the investments which they thought was most appropriate for their circumstance, and the considerations that they took into account when choosing that. Following that, we're of course going to open it up to questions which you can submit through this web portal. Okay, so let's get started. So the ABLE Act is better, the formal name is the Stephen Beck Jr. Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, or better known as the ABLE Act. It became law December 19th of 2014 after nearly a decade of advocacy performed by local, state, and national disability-related advocacy groups. By the time the law was signed into law in mid-December, nearly a couple years ago, coming up on, it had overwhelming bipartisan support in both the Senate and the House, meaning that it had support by members on the Republican side as well as the Democratic side in both chambers, and was subsequently signed into law. And what it basically does is, in its most simple sense, is it creates a new option for some people with disabilities and their families to save for their future while protecting their eligibility for means-tested, publicly funded benefits such as Medicaid and supplemental security income, but certainly all other federally funded means-tested benefits. And this is something that's an incredibly exciting ability, and we believe will really truly allow millions of people with disabilities to be able to realize a new level of financial independence and self-sufficiency. So, just to go over very quickly some key characteristics. There are eligibility requirements related to opening an ABLE account that speak to the age in which the individual first experienced his or her disability and related to the severity of such disability. And again, I would encourage folks to go to the ABLE National Resource Center and check out some of the resources that talk in more depth about who is eligible, because not everybody with a disability is eligible, but certainly a large portion of folks with disabilities will be and currently are eligible to open up these accounts. An eligible individual is not obligated to enroll in their state of residence. So when the law was originally signed, there was a residency requirement, but since then, about nearly a year ago, Congress went back and eliminated the residence requirement associated with the law. So that means that if you meet the eligibility criteria, and let's say you live in Texas, you can enroll in other programs accepting national enrollment, such as currently the state of Ohio, Nebraska, Tennessee, soon to be Oregon, Michigan, Virginia, and several other states. So you don't have to live in the state in which you open up your account, but you certainly can if you'd like. The designated beneficiary is the account owner. This is very important to remember. that individual, regardless of whether or not there may be another person such as the parent, a guardian, a person with signature authority over the account, may have the right to sign and to maintain and to utilize the account on behalf of the beneficiary. It's still the truth that the eligible individual, the beneficiary, is always the account owner under all circumstances. Funds in the account may be used for qualified disability-related expenses. Again, I would encourage you to go to the ABLE National Resource Center to get a better understanding of what that exactly means. But in a very basic sense, it means that the funds in the account can be used for disability-related expenses by the beneficiary, the person with the disability, that helps that individual increase or maintain their health, independence, or quality of life. So that's very broad. Additionally, assets in and distributions for qualified related expenses will be disregarded or given special treatment when determining eligibility for most federally funded means-tested benefits, including Social Security and Medicaid. And again, there's more detailed information about that on the website that I encourage everybody to check out. Lastly, we want to talk briefly about contributions. Anybody can contribute into an ABLE account. Friends, family, the beneficiary themselves, as a result of perhaps having employment, can currently put funds into the ABLE account. But all contributions combined in any given tax year, January 1st to December 31st, are not to exceed $14,000, and that's important to note, and that's something that should be taken into consideration when opening an ABLE account and when determining what tool might be best for the person with a disability in terms of saving for their future. Okay. Just very quickly, the development of ABLE programs. Currently, there are 5 active programs available, the majority of which are open enrollment in terms of accepting anybody no matter where they live. The only program that has currently an in-state program is the state of Florida. Florida United ABLE is currently an in-state program, but all other programs, including Ohio's program, Nebraska's program, Tennessee's program, and Michigan's program, are all national programs that are accepting enrollment no matter where the individual lives, provided that they meet the eligibility criteria. We expect several more programs to be launched here in the next few months, including the state of Virginia, which will launch in mid-December, and the state of Oregon will launch their program just actually in a couple weeks here. So we're very excited to see that. There's also a consortium of states that I believe currently consists of 11 different states that is doing their best to get up and running in 2016, but if not, I'm confident that they will be up and running soon after the new year. So now that we have kind of a very basic understanding of some of the key characteristics related to ABLE, we want to go ahead and dive into what the bulk of this presentation and webinar is concerning, is better understanding the investment side of ABLE. A lot of folks think that these accounts are very similar to a checking account or a savings account, which they may be, but they're really designed to grow assets over time through investment vehicles, which is why when folks enroll in these programs, which is done online right now, so folks don't have to go into a brick and mortar type bank. Once they go down the road in terms of signing up, they will be asked to choose an investment option. We found that a lot of people are being caught off guard with this, either not knowing that they'd be asked to choose an investment option, or perhaps not feeling comfortable with choosing an investment option at that time, which is what really has provoked us and compelled us to do this webinar. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our experts who will be giving some information related, general information related to investments and different scenarios and things to take in consideration when choosing your investment option under ABLE. Okay, so we're going to start out with savings accounts versus investment accounts.
So Chris, this is Mark Freese. Thank you very much for presenting that good information on ABLE. and thank both you and Michael Morris for the opportunity to get the word out to the public. I'm a huge fan of ABLE. ABLE is viewed by many as one of the most empowering tools for persons with disabilities. It will allow persons with disabilities to have personal savings and still be eligible for government benefits, which is fantastic and encourages them to work. You know, our team and many others testified to the U.S. Senate to help ABLE to pass and become a reality for families. So now we're talking about, okay, you want to open an ABLE Act account and you're concerned about the investment choices. So today we're going to talk about the savings versus investment account. So it's important to understand that ABLE is a savings and investment account. You have two options, and most states will offer both alternatives, both savings and investments. And you will choose which and how your money is invested. So a brief overview, savings accounts allow you to access your money any time. They may be called savings accounts, they could be called a checking account or a money market account, one of those names. And that's going to be something that where you're not going to have a high potential to lose money, almost none unless the bank went under, and that's usually backed by FDIC insurance. So losing any of the money is highly unlikely. The savings options today, however, may not provide much of a return. And for those of you that are a little bit older, in 1980, you know, money market accounts were paying double digits, 12, 13, 14%. Now today, they're paying about 0.5%, 0.5%. So currently savings accounts are paying historically low returns. And that's a problem if you put all your money in that area and you have a long-term goal. The second category are investments. So investments involve stocks and they involve bonds. You can make or lose money in those investments. You could potentially lose all your money if you put in the wrong investments in those accounts, although probably highly unlikely to lose everything. That is definitely a possibility. And these accounts can be affected by changes outside of what you have control over, like a change in interest rates, or a change in the economy, or a change in current or future laws. So when you're making that decision, it's important to think about all those things. So before you make any decisions, you should really understand what your situation is. So I always ask a lot of questions. If you're putting money into this account, can you afford to lose part of this money? If you lost the money, can you replace it? Is a replacement vehicle do it? So if you're working and it's really a long-term savings account and investment account, then you might be able to take more risk. But if it's something short, and John will address this, then you really need to think about it being safe and more on the conservative side. So what amount of risk do you need to take in order to achieve your goals? So obviously, if you're looking for a long-term pool where you're going to be able to draw money out, and you really want to draw money out at 4 or 5% per year, well, you can't really do that within a money market account. So you really need to take a look at, what do I really need this money to do? And how does the ABLE account fit in with the rest of your investment plan? And as I talked about at the last webinar we did with National Disability Institute, this is one piece of the puzzle. So ABLE's part of it. You might have a special needs trust. You might have Social Security benefits. They all have to fit together. And how they fit together is important. So when you're doing that planning, you need to think about, how does the ABLE fit in? What's that going to be used for in my particular situation? And what's the time horizon for the money? Is it short term? Is it long term? When do you think you might need it? So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to John, and he's going to talk about the objectives for ABLE investors.
Well, thank you, Mark. But first of all, I'm really honored to be on this call with Catherine Beck and to thank her so much for all that she's done to advance this great cause. I do realize that her husband, Stephen, was really the trailblazer behind the ABLE account, but as a parent of my 25-year-old son, James, who has Down syndrome, I know that truly it takes a team to make great things like this happen. So I think before we get into this, and you really have to realize, before you put your money into an ABLE account, it is important to get a handle on what the money will be used for. This involves identifying the objectives of the account. Your objectives should be broken down into short-term, intermediate-term, and long-term goals. Well, an example of a short-term goal is planning to go to a baseball game, or pretty much just putting money aside for a short-term weekend away. The next goal is defined by a short to intermediate-term goal, and that would be an idea would be planning for a vacation or putting the money aside for a down payment on an apartment. It's within the 5-year time frame. And for a long term, you really should put money aside, recognizing that you will not really have to access that money for 5 to 7 years. An example of a long-term savings would be setting money aside to potentially put down on a down payment for a condominium, or to have money there for your long-term supplemental needs. And there are two variables involved in this. The first part is risk and time. And so as Mark mentioned, you have both savings and investments to choose from. It's important to truly understand the importance that knowing when you need the funds in your able account will influence the investment choices you make for your contributions. The longer you can invest the money, the more time investments will have to recover from any potential losses of principal. In understanding risk, all investments carry some degree of risk. So I think the most important piece here would be to really, as Mark had mentioned also, the investment time frame plays a large role in determining your proper risk profile. Generally, the higher the risk, the higher the potential for better return, and the higher risk of a potential loss of some of your money, or if not all of your funds. I think that in doing this, one should sit down and look at their own personal risk profile. And this is really defines how willing you are to potentially lose money in return for obviously potentially larger returns. And first would be your attitude towards risk, your comfort zone. What is your comfort zone all about? There's some folks may be comfortable knowing that they can put in $100, and although it may go to 90, they can really ride it out, realizing that over the long term, there's greater potential to have the $110 in the account. So at the same time, though, your goals should really be look at identifying that comfort zone. At the same time, you have to look at what the objectives of the money are. And more, perhaps even more overriding with your willingness to ride things out, you really have to look back and understand what your current financial situation is. After you really get a handle on your situation, if you have enough money set aside for your emergency needs, have enough money set aside for the time away for that weekend, you're then really in a position so you can then begin to really set money aside for more long term. And so that really helps you define the long-term time frame. And the last piece here is that we call this the financial planning pyramid. I think this is really the cornerstone of planning, the approach a person should take about how am I going to invest my money for the long term or for the short term. So on the left, we've identified the level of potential risk you'll be taking on with a certain investment vehicle. On the right side, we lay down the level of potential return. So I call this the financial planning 101 chart. So whenever we meet with families, you really have to make sure that the step one would be to have money set aside in cash savings, cash emergency account, or money market account. Once you've identified or covered your bases there, you can move up to the next level of potential gain with some types of bonds. Again, bonds can range also with high risk or low risk. I think it's important to understand the objectives of each bond. If it's a bond fund that you purchase, to understand what that objective is. On top of that, it would be really a portfolio that would consist of both stocks, bonds, and cash. And then at the peak of the pyramid would be stocks. Over the long term, you have the highest potential return on your money by investing in stocks. At the same time, you're recognizing you'd be taking on potential risk.
So this is Mark again, and as you see on the chart here, it's titled The Greatest Chart Ever. So I'll caveat, I didn't name that chart. But it is a very good chart to think about over the long haul what happens. And as John alluded to with that great pyramid, if you're on the second level, the third level, or the fourth level of that pyramid, you're in something that can fluctuate. You know, bonds can fluctuate in value, stocks can fluctuate in value. So how you read this chart is the little blue lines that are going up and down, that's where the market ended up for that particular year. This covers from 1980 through 2015. And the little red dots are where the market was at one point during the year on the negative. So this is a really good way to think about, there's a lot of times, in fact most times, where at some point during the year the market has been down for all kinds of reasons. And I'll use this year as a perfect example. At the beginning of the year we had problems in China and the market was down about 4 or 5%, almost 6% at the beginning of the year. And then the market recovered. And then we had this BRICS exit, and then the market went down again, and then the market recovered. And then there was a lot of worry in our country about what's going to happen with the presidency and who's going to win. And the market went down, and then it recovered. So the most important part of it is if you're in this category called investments, you have to think about the fact that you have to have the discipline to stick it out. Because as John alluded to, the time that you have the money to invest has a lot to do with what your return is. If you look at that chart, most of those lines are going upward. They're moving in a positive direction. They're above the median line. So most of the time you've had positive rates of return. But there have been negative periods, and this time frame is pretty good to look at because it covers both a couple of really bad periods of time, like in the technology bubble burst in the 2000s and in the real estate banking bubble that we saw just recently in 2008. So it's really not timing the market, it's really time in the market. And 85% of investors, according to a lot of independent research, do not do as well as the general market. 85%. And that's because they make emotional decisions. So when you're thinking about ABLE, you really need to think about what is this money for and how are we going to use it. And I'll tell you a real quick story. So I was talking to someone just actually yesterday that called in from the last ABLE webinar that we did. And this gentleman was very, very nice. He was 25 years old, and he described his situation. He had gotten some sort of significant lump settlement for an injury, and he really didn't need the cash flow at all now. He was 25. He was receiving Social Security benefits. He was living at home with his parents. And so everything was really pretty good for him. He didn't really need to have this money immediately. But in a lot of cases, in fact, about 70% special needs children or adults are living at home with their parents, 70% of the time. When those parents die, you have a whole interruption of what you're going to do. And an interruption can cause a lot of problems. So when you're thinking about ABLE, what that might look like. And so for him, his parents are now gone at that point in the future, and then he's really going to need this money. So for him, his time horizon is long. He's got a long time before he's probably going to need the money because his parents are in their 60s. So when he's thinking about ABLE, he's going to be thinking about a long-term horizon for it. As John alluded to, there's other people that are going to be using this money for disability reasons, for the cover expenses because of their disability, that might be short-term. So each case is different. You need to really think about your situation. You need to reach out to a professional that knows that area well, and make sure you find out what your situation is, and get an expert to help evaluate it for you, and get help if you can. The next chart talks about bond prices and yields. And I don't want to get real technical, but some of the choices within the ABLE Act account are bond related. And it's important to understand that bonds fluctuate inversely with interest rates. So as John alluded to, they have risk. They can move up and down in principal. So right now, interest rates are at almost all-time lows. Maybe they go a little bit lower. There's some countries with below zero interest rates, negative interest rates, but they can't go a lot lower. So the direction most likely for interest rates is higher. And that means that bond prices will come down in value. So that's the risk, and you need to understand that. To give you a little bit of flavor of what that might mean, if you had a 1% increase in interest rates and you had a 20-year average maturity bond, your bond portfolio would decline by about 15%. So when John was talking about how do you figure out what sort of investment you should make, should it be in the money market account, don't think of bonds being as conservative as a lot of people think, because they're really not. There's also some target date funds in some of these programs, which also would include bonds. So it's important to note those are great choices for a lot of people, but understand that they will have bonds in the portfolio, and you have to understand your time horizon and your risk objectives with those particular accounts. It's also important to diversify. You know, my mom, when she was living, said, don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's a simple way to describe you don't want to have it all in one investment most likely. You know, different investments will potentially help lower the risk on your portfolio. One good way to at it that we do for clients is dividends. Some of the choices within the ABLE Act account include dividends. Dividends are payments that are made by a company because you own the company. So in the choices within some of the ABLE Act accounts, they're going to pay those dividends no matter what the stock market does, up, down, or sideways. So it's one way to make yourself less dependent upon the stock market. The second thing to think about, and I describe this with clients almost every single day, I call it the 5% rule. So if you're looking at your whole picture, so you have ABLE, you have Social Security, maybe you have a special needs trust, you kind of add all that money together, you think, what's the value of that account, or what's the value of that account when I'm going to need it? So 5% means you can draw out comfortably somewhere between 4 to 5% per year over 25 years and know that money will last. And likelihood of that is somewhere around 80%. So when you're thinking about your money, if you need to replace $1 million or $100,000 in income for your child, and you look at that 5% rule, you need about $1 million in order to be able to do that. A couple other things in diversification, there are some choices within some of the programs that include international investments. You know, recently international investments haven't done as well as U.S. investments. International investments also have additional risk. In John's chart, which I thought was great on the pyramid, that might be even on top of just general stocks because there's currency risk and there's political risk. And some of the choices in the programs too offer real estate. Real estate also has some additional risks that you should be aware of. So I'm going to turn it back over to John, and he's going to talk about hypothetical investment options.
So securities most frequently found in the various portfolios that the states offer may be classified as a conservative portfolio, a moderate portfolio, or an aggressive portfolio. As Mark mentioned, there may be some target funds in there which would consist of a collection of different funds that are offered by a financial vendor. So, but in the conservative asset allocation, that would consist of a combination of cash, cash equivalents, money markets, and bonds. On the moderate, it consists of moderate stocks, bonds, and cash. In the aggressive, it would be all stocks. Again, tying this back, you really have to be looking at what is the objective that you have for the money in the account. If the objective is to really subsidize your monthly income needs or have money available for short-term needs, that money would be invested in the cash or money market account. In many respects, that will be noted as more of a transaction-based account. On the other part would be if you have money set aside for the intermediate to long-term, that would be really a moderate asset allocation or a moderate mix, or potentially more aggressive for the long-term goals. And I think the last chart that we have here pretty much ties everything together between, we say, the time frame, the risk, and investment options. On the top, I laid out length of time money may remain invested, because obviously the longer you have, many times we call the patience with the money. If you have patience with the money, if you invest it for the long term, it can be invested on the aggressive allocation chart. Some of the plans may have individual funds that they offer that may only consist of stocks. That would be the type of investment option you would choose for the more aggressive or long-term goals. On the below, we identify relative measures of risk, the various investment portfolios, and also looking at the loss of potential return. So pretty much at the end of all this, when you're getting ready to sign up and putting money into the ABLE account, the first step would be to go back and look, all right, now what's my time frame on this? When will I need the money? If you don't need the money for an extended period of time, one may choose more stocks, again, recognizing more potential return, but at the same time giving up some potential risk. On the other part would be the money market account, which would be an account where you put money in from your paycheck. Let's say if you're fortunate to, you're out having a job where you earn income, you put the money into the account, recognizing if you need the money the next day, that would be in the money market account. Some of the accounts have check writing. Some have almost like a debit card that you could use to access the money. The money that you plan on accessing would be set aside in the money market or cash account. The money is at the same time, though, if you've achieved the point you're planning for yourself, where there's enough money available that you have access to the day-to-day needs, you can then ratchet it up a bit, take on a little bit more risk, move the money to a moderate asset allocation portfolio, and then ultimately, once you've really kind of looked at things, have a little base, have a little money for an intermediate-term goal, you may consider investing more for the aggressive or some long-term financial goals and objectives. So that pretty much ends up my section here, and I'll turn it over to Mark, where we have a few more charts that talk more on the investment mix.
So one of the things that's a misconception, which I mentioned earlier, are bonds. So a lot of times bonds are used by an older generation, CDs, treasury bills, bonds, things like that. Mainly though, bonds, corporate type bonds. And they can fluctuate. And what this chart shows you is down on the bottom of the page would show you the risk ranging from 9-10% all the way up to 19. And then going vertically up there would show your return. So you can see 100% of your bonds, which is circled down on the bottom, and you can see the risk factor around 12. You can see the returns a little over 9%. And if you go straight up that chart, you look at a 60-40 mix, you see that obviously has a higher rate of return. We all know that intellectually. We all know that stocks over the long haul have done better than bonds. What we don't realize sometimes is a mix of some part of stocks and some part of bonds, in this case 60-40, actually has a much higher rate of return and a lower risk. So that's important when you're thinking about your ABLE Act account, how you're going to invest that money, seeing that a blended portfolio has less risk in many cases and a much higher rate of return. This is particularly important for the target date funds. And a lot of questions I've gotten personally on target date is what are those and how do they work? So target date means that there's going to be a mix of assets that's going to be targeted towards when you think you'll need the money. So in some cases, if that term is short, you're going to have a lot more money in bonds. You may not realize that. So if your target date is long and you don't follow it or keep track of it, and you get closer and closer to the date where the target is up, so let's say it's 20 years out down the road, you're going to have more of your money in bonds. And that may be a positive thing, and that may be a negative thing, depending upon your time horizon and depending upon what bonds do. That's just important to note. So what's very important is this is not a one-and-done situation. Depending upon factors like your age and your circumstances, there's going to be many times when it makes sense to change your investment objectives. Higher risk may be appropriate at a younger age. And I told you the story about the 25-year-old. His time horizon is long. He can afford the movements up and down in the market. He can afford changes to what our president decides to do as far as laws that have to do with investments. The rule of investment means you might have to change often as your situation changes. And I always describe for clients the same thing. Short-term needs mean short-term investments. Short-term needs, short-term investments. So if you think you're going to need that money over the next year or 2 years, as John alluded to, you want to make sure it's in something that can't move, can't fluctuate, and that's really going to be an interest-based account. The other thing that's important to note is fees. So there are fees for all the accounts, ABLE Act accounts. There's a fee that you see, which is the administrative fee that's shown on your account statement, and there are investment fees, which they describe within the language within those different states. And they're deducted directly by the financial institution managing the investment options. So if you had a portfolio return 10% and the fee was 1%, well then you're going to get 9%. So you really need to know what you're paying. You also have to understand most of the programs now that have come out, I'm very pleased to see this, offer index options, which are much less expensive than mutual funds. So indexes don't have a professional money manager. They're not making individual decisions on what stocks they own on an ongoing basis, not buying and selling, but they're a lot less expensive. So by a lot less, I mean an index may charge you 2 or 3/10%, where a mutual fund can charge 1/2 to 2.5% depending upon the investment. And that makes a huge difference. And I'll give you one concrete example. So if you're in the ABLE Act account, you start off with $14,000, and you added $14,000 a year for 20 years, and you got a rate of return of 7%, which is the average return of the stock market over the last 80 years or so, you'd have about $668,000. If you had the same $14,000 and you added $14,000 per year, you did it for 20 years, but you only got a 5% return because there's 2% going out to expenses, your end result would be about $523,000. So that's a difference of $145,000. So fees matter. It's important to take a look at that in your planning.
Okay, wow, that was some incredible information. I want to thank both Mark and John for taking the time to help us out and putting together these slides with such great information. And I just want to note how important it is that folks fully understand all aspects related to ABLE in terms of saving for their futures, and to understand, as Mark said and as John had talked about, that ABLE is really just one tool in a toolbox of many that can help folks with disabilities and their families plan for a bright future. We've talked in other webinars about combining ABLE accounts with special needs trusts and the comparison between those two different types of vehicles or tools, and I would encourage folks who have questions about that to go back and take a look at that webinar. We dedicated an entire 90-minute webinar to discussing that. But what I want to do now is I want to turn it over to some panelists that I'm extremely excited that agreed to share their experience in terms of two basic things. One is what was so special, what compelled them to really get involved in ABLE, either themselves as a beneficiary and a person with a disability, or as a parent for a person of a person with a disability. What things did they take into consideration when choosing one ABLE account or program over another? Because we do know, and we're very happy to report, that there are currently options and that there will continue to be more options in the future. So it is interesting to see or get some perspective on what characteristics folks are taking in terms of choosing one program over another. But then tying it back to the information that was provided in this particular webinar, we're also curious as to when people were prompted with the opportunity to choose one investment option over another, what are some things that went through their mind when choosing one option over another? What circumstances did they consider? Whether they chose a more conservative portfolio or option, or perhaps something with higher risk but also had the opportunity for higher yield. So I want to start us off, and I'm going to introduce our panelists one at a time as they start to go, but I'd like to start with Alex Guinness. Alex is a policy and research specialist at the World Institute on Disability, and he's actually helped us out here before and part of the ABLE National Resource Center. He is currently managing the New Earth Disability Project, which addresses how climate change will affect people with disabilities and how people can prepare. The project has compiled over 20 resources and features research and policy recommendations on heat waves, climate-related migration, and more. So with that, I'm going to open it up to Alex. And Alex, feel free to base kind of your response off the 5 questions that we have currently up on the screen, or just give us a general perspective, whatever you think has been important to you in terms of getting involved in the ABLE space, a little bit about yourself, and then a little bit about what compelled you or what things you took in consideration in terms of choosing an investment option.
Hi. Well, thank you for bringing me onto this and onto this webinar, and I really appreciate what everybody is doing in terms of educating and spreading this education. So my situation, here I am. I'm a working person with a disability and earning money and trying to save it away and trying to have a certain amount of control over it on my own. And I've kind of gone through ebbs and flows of income and savings and the rest of it. And I was at one point even, for example, where I had SSDI when I was a little bit younger. And as I was still in this moment, there's a 9-month trial work period where I could earn essentially as much as I wanted and still be able to keep DI. Granted, I'm on California Medi-Cal, so I can't earn as much as I wanted, but just within the DI space, I had that. Regardless of what the income limits were, with Medi-Cal, if I wanted to keep that, and then all of a sudden I was earning several $1,000s a month, but only had a couple $1,000s in expenses, I actually had to spend more than I needed to and just have this money evaporate into thin air, not be able to save it away, and really almost get into a place where I wasn't practicing or getting into and really learning kind of the level of frugality that you need to be able to do as an adult. So for me, it was incredibly important that way. Also then, as I'm saving money, to be able to have a certain amount of agency over where my money goes, over doing my own budgeting, over over understanding what is necessary to have expenses on. Now, so that was the big reason why I decided to enroll in the ABLE program. And for me, personally, I am enrolled in Ohio's stable account program. And what I took into consideration when choosing that one is there were two main things. I like that Ohio has 5 different account options, and you can choose kind of a percentage proportion between them. And I decided to they have 4 Vanguard funds. One of them is 80% stock, 20% bond, and then they have a 60-40, and then a 40-60, and then a 20-80, and then they have a FDIC insured account. And you can choose a percentage mix. So basically what you can do is choose an exact percentage of how much you want in stocks. And I liked that. You know, I'm a relatively conservative investor, so I went with the 20-80 portfolio. But another big thing that I appreciated was that they have a debit card. And for me to be able to have a certain amount of control over my own finances, here I can and have checks written on the account, say for rent or anything along those lines. But to be able to have a debit card and go to the grocery store and be able to go to anywhere, if I'm over at the wheelchair repair shop and I need to purchase a small item for that, to be able to swipe a debit card and be able to swipe that ABLE debit card and have that freedom of spending is so powerful. You know, I know people that have trusts, and then if they need to spend money on things, they have to balance a bank account with their own credit card, and just having a whole check going toward rent and figuring out how to make money flow through that way. So I like this direct spending opportunity there. And then this next one, did you feel comfortable having to choose your own investment options? Absolutely. You know, my brother is a big investor. I know about investing. So for me to have this was really kind of a simplified way of looking at that. Having a very simple Vanguard fund was really easy for me to do. And I just said, okay, I want to be on the more conservative end. And that worked out great. And then what I take into consideration when choosing my investment option is how volatile the world is, I guess I would say. You know, we're in a kind of on an edge of where the world is. I opened my ABLE account all of, I think, 3 or 4 weeks before the election, and I just wanted to wait and see. I just opened it now, and then I know that I have one opportunity to change my investment portfolio before the end of the year, and then I will have one opportunity to do it next year. You know, with the ABLE program, you can change once per calendar year which actual ABLE program you're in, and then you can change twice in a calendar year which investment portfolio option you have within a state. So I decided to do that. Another thing that I want to say is we had an event over here at WID where I demonstrated, okay, this is what it takes to sign up for an ABLE account. And this is one of the things I really appreciated about Ohio. It was incredibly easy. It took me less than an hour to basically go through it, fill out my information. I had to go into my my checking account and figure out what the checking and routing numbers were, but it was really, really easy for me to open this. And I think that just kind of the quick, intuitive aspect of it was really powerful. So yeah, that's how I got involved. That's my thought process on this.
That's great. Thank you, Alex. I really appreciate your perspective, and I think you pointed at a couple key characteristics that I just want to reiterate. One is that folks can, if they so choose for any reason, to move programs, let's say, from state X to state Y, they are allowed to do that, and that is permissible. So let's say that down the road you realize that another program pops up and it has other benefits, maybe different investment options that that you might be interested in, or maybe your state launches a program and maybe it has a state income tax deduction that you'd like to take advantage of. You can roll over the entirety of the account into a new program. Additionally, another thing that Alex pointed out, and he's absolutely right on, is the fact that you can change your investment direction up to two times in any given tax year. So that's something. So if somebody felt that they wanted to go in a different direction for any reason, they do have the ability to do that. Lastly, the last thing I want to point out that Alex had mentioned, and it goes back towards some of the points, some of the very significant points made in the presentation, is that the program that Alex is in and the other programs that are offered do offer an opportunity to create more diverse portfolios. So it's not putting, as Mark said, all your eggs into one basket. You can choose different percentages based on several different options that vary in risk to a point in which you feel comfortable based on some of the considerations that Alex pointed out. So again, I want to say thank you so much, Alex, not only for participating in the webinar, but the great work that the World Institute on Disability out in California does. Really appreciate your input. Let's go ahead and move on to our second panelist. Let's go to Jennifer Sikora. Jennifer Sikora graduated from George Mason University with a degree in International Studies. She served on Congressman Bill McCollum's legislative staff for over 5 years, handling issues areas such as foreign affairs, defense, agriculture, and space. After the birth of her son Sean, she became involved with the Down Syndrome Association of North Virginia. She co-chaired their inaugural Buddy Walk, was a member of its board of directors, and co-chaired the Advocacy and Governmental Affairs Committee. It was this group of parents brainstorming around a kitchen table that began work on what later became the ABLE Act. Jennifer is one of several panelists that really got involved on the ground level in terms of what ended up becoming ABLE and what ended up becoming an incredible benefit for millions of people with disabilities, and I'm just very happy to have her. So Jen, if you want to go ahead and get started off again, you're welcome to go through the questions, or if you just want to give kind of a more broad view of your experience, that's fine too.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Chris. And I have to say, the presentation has been excellent. I wish that I had some of this information when we were opening our ABLE account back in early July. We are account holders in Florida with ABLE United. My son, Sean, actually was the first account holder in the state, which was pretty exciting since we've been working on this bill for so long. My congressional background gave us the into Congressman Crenshaw's office to even bring up the idea of ABLE, and we worked closely with them and with the disability support groups. Steve Beck, my very dear friend, was the one who really took charge of shepherding ABLE through the halls of Congress and gaining support from many members. As you said at the beginning, Chris, Democrats, Republicans, this was the most widely supported piece of legislation that has passed Congress in recent years. And it's, for kids like my son, it's really life-changing. My son's now 14. So we're looking at more moderate long-term investments. We're looking at a possible post-secondary program for the use of his ABLE funds, or possibly a down payment on a condominium, something much more long-term. So when I looked at investments through ABLE United, I was looking at things that were a little bit more moderate to aggressive, not as much conservative, since I knew that we didn't need that money right away. We could take a little bit more risk with the funds that we were putting in, and knowing that we had time to readjust as we needed to as he gets older and we see what his needs are going to be. It was pretty easy to make the choice to become an ABLE account holder because sitting around that table 10, 12 years ago with Steve and other parents, and we said, you know, what do we need to do that will make a difference? What will make a difference for our kids? And being able to put money aside and save for our children with disabilities the same way we save for our kids without disabilities was the #1 thing. And so as soon as Florida passed their legislation after the National ABLE law was enacted, I was very privileged to be able to be asked to work with them in getting up and running. So it was a given that we were going to go ahead and open an account here. And for me, one of the things I liked about Florida is for the first year, the state of Florida waived their enrollment fees. Their investment fees were a little bit lower than some of the other programs. But also, it's just a point of pride. I'm a Floridian. I want to be here and help support my state as much as I can. And then when we were looking at the investment options, it was really a pretty easy choice because we already had a 529 college fund set up for our daughter, and it was very similar to that and to our 401k. So I was used to looking at investments. I have no background in finance or investments, but what I was able to find on the website was very clear and easy to understand. And much like Alex's perspective, it was very simple to go in and enroll. I needed a couple pieces of key information like my banking information and a couple other things that they require to satisfy the law, but it was very easy to do. There was help that was available if I needed it at any point to either call or get on and chat with somebody. So it was really a very simple and easy process. And then knowing that I can go in any time of day or night, take a look at where the account is, be able to add money, and then twice a year if I want to shift those investments around to be able to do that, made it even easier for us to be able to go ahead and make that decision.
Excellent, excellent, great. Thank you so much for your perspective and all the hard work that you and so many others put forth over a relatively long period of time in order to really get this thing off the ground and now to have the opportunity for folks to enroll in programs. I know that you're in a unique situation. There's 5 programs that are up and running, and only the folks in Florida actually have options to 100% of the programs because Florida did decide to have an in-state program. And I think certainly the ABLE National Resource Center has done an incredible amount of work with ABLE United. I know they've put, as well as the other programs, they've put a lot of time, a lot of money into marketing and getting these programs, right. I think both to your and Alex's point in terms of the ease in which it takes to set up these accounts, that is extremely deliberate. When we were working, when we continue to work, and we have worked with the various programs in their development, we wanted to make sure that provided that folks are eligible to open these accounts, they can do so at a very, very low cost and with as much ease as possible. And I think that is clearly seen by the fact that these programs that are up and running, folks are able to get into them very quickly. They're able to monitor their contributions. They're able to make contributions quickly and with a lot of ease. And we're extremely happy to see that all the hard work that these programs have put forth in terms of trying to meet those goals is actually coming to fruition by testimonials like yourselves, Jen. So I really appreciate, again, the hard work and your perspective. With that, let's go ahead and turn to Karen Pruitt. Karen is married and mother of 2 children. Her youngest son, Caleb, was born with Down syndrome in 2007. She got involved with a number of disability-related groups and communities when Caleb was very young. Worked with the local Down Syndrome Association in Jackson, Florida. While there, the association worked very closely with Congressman Andrew Crenshaw, who championed the ABLE Act in the legislature. And again, was one of those folks that really got in on the ground level in terms of advocating and reaching out to Congressman Crenshaw, who unfortunately has decided to retire, but certainly his contributions cannot be forgotten, and has been one of the key, if not the key, individuals, along with about 5 other members of Congress, in terms of making this the ABLE up, taking it from a dream to something that's in reality. So, Karen, with that, again, if you'd like to go through the questions, or if you'd like to just give us a broad overview of your experience, we'd be happy to hear about it.
Sure, and thanks for having me. This has been a great presentation so far. I just want to personally reach out and thank Catherine and Jen for their leadership at the beginning of this, along with Stephen and a handful of others. We up here in Jacksonville had a relationship with Congressman Crenshaw's office, obviously, but riding on the coattails of many who did so much work so many years ahead of time. So huge thank you to you guys for advocating. Let's see, how did you choose to enroll? So, you know, we advocated for ABLE for a number of years. It was kind of a no-brainer to sign up for ABLE when it became available. We were thrilled in 2014 when it was signed into law, and couldn't wait for it to open up in Florida. We are parents of a 9-year-old son, so our situation is just a little bit different. We are looking at not long-term, but I would say mid to long-range goals for him. We opened ABLE with really the intention of him contributing when he is employed. So we set very moderate to medium investment goals when we chose our account. We are currently enrolled in Florida, and we opened our account that first day in July when it opened. When choosing an ABLE program, at the time there were only 3 options for us. There was Ohio, there was Nebraska, and then Florida came on board shortly after Nebraska. Same as Jen, you know, it's kind of a personal pride to be related to the Florida group. We like that there was no annual fee and no minimum amount to enroll. We can roll it over if we want to, and there are 7 different investment options, or you can build your own. We decided to go with the moderate. It's similar to planning for retirement is how we looked at it. We don't need it for a while, so we picked the moderate. Did we feel comfortable? Absolutely. It was very easy. Again, echoing Alex and Jen, I think it took a half an hour, if that, to get everything signed up. And again, taking into consideration the age of our son, he's 9, and we are middle-aged parents, so, you know, if God forbid something should happen, we wanted to be able to have our adult daughter access that money quickly. We looked at the time frame before we realistically needed to use it, and, you know, thinking maybe 5, 6, 7 years, we might need some money for him to access education. He's in a private school currently, and if we wanted to move over to a different school option, that might be something that we would use the funds for. Employment training and assistive technology are other options that we were looking at. And that's really it for us. Again, great webinar so far. We also use this in conjunction with the Special Needs Trust. So I would echo the fact that this is just a tool in the toolbox, and everyone needs to consider everything when they're looking at this option.
That's great. That's great, Karen. And could I ask you, because I know this has been a big topic of conversation in terms of people thinking or getting the perception that it's kind of ABLE versus a special needs trust, whereas we here have tried to expound upon the fact that there's no reason why a person couldn't have both, and in fact, there's reason to believe that the benefits of having both are greater than having any one of them individually. So as a person, as a parent who's decided to have both, could you tell us anything about kind of what you plan, how you plan to use them differently or in conjunction or things like that? Or is it more you just want to have as many tools at your disposal while your child is young right now, and then you're going to kind of try and figure that out later?
I think, yeah, the second option, absolutely. We want to have we want to have as many different options for Caleb as possible. And then once it gets closer to the time when we're going to actually use the money for him, we don't anticipate using it for at least 5 years. So, you know, he's at home, he's getting most of his needs met through school. He's not getting SSI right now, so that's nothing that we have to worry about at this point. I think, the point that Alex brought up, or maybe it was Jen, about you can review your options twice a year. So if we feel like we need to make a change with ABLE, then we can. So.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and just to expound upon a couple points that you made that I thought are particularly interesting, and I think that are shared by a lot of other families and people with disabilities themselves who are setting up their own accounts, is a lot of folks are setting them up with the idea that they will be able to contribute themselves as a result of employment. There's a misconception out there right now that the beneficiary themselves, as a result of employment, cannot contribute into their account, and that's not true. So folks should understand that if you are a person with a disability who qualifies to have an ABLE account, you can open it up today and begin to contribute earnings as a result of your employment into your own ABLE account. That being said, if the person is also needs to kind of shield that money because they're on means-tested benefits, it's important to note that ABLE helps you shield money in terms of having a resource, and not so much or at all in terms of helping you out with respect to earned income, if that's taken into consideration to maintain eligibility for benefits. So that's something that I know I've gotten a lot of questions about. Additionally, I think you bring up an excellent point, Karen, about the fact that when looking at different programs have not only different options with respect to investments, but many of them have different numbers of options. I believe it's Tennessee that actually has the broadest or largest number of different options, and other programs have chosen to have 4 or 5 options. You know, I think that speaks to, you know, how comfortable somebody feels in wanting a larger amount of options, or maybe is comfortable with more basic options. That's something, depending on the individual's understanding of investments and where they're at, and you know, taking into consideration time horizons and needs. I think those could play at least a part of consideration when choosing one program over another. So, with that, I want to introduce our final panelist. I'm extremely excited to have her on and for her to take the time to share her experience with us. It's Catherine Beck, who's the mother of a teenage daughter who qualifies for an ABLE account. Catherine is the wife of the late Stephen Beck, whose name is on the piece of legislation, that is now law, the Stephen Beck Jr. Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, and is well deserved as a result of his tremendous leadership from day one, in terms of, again, taking what was just a thought and a dream to help people with disabilities and their families save for their future, and really bringing it into reality and helping, as a result, helping what will, I'm confident, be hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities and their families now have an opportunity to realize a new level of financial independence, and what it really comes down to is peace of mind. So I want to say thank you so much for joining us, Catherine, and feel free to, again, base your answers off the questions, or just give us some background and perspective.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to all of you and your kind remembrances of Steve. We so miss him. And thank you to everyone, Jen, every other person out there who worked diligently with Steve for all those years to get this passed. It wasn't just Steve, it was a group effort by the whole disability and by both sides of the aisle, which is incredible. Enough said about that. We wanted an ABLE account for Natalie to put all those nickels and dimes away, just like we did for her sister. We wanted to save money for her post-secondary education, for her independent living. Natalie wants to open a nail shop, and she needs money to do this. And I look at ABLE as a way for us to get started with savings for her. Since we're residents of Virginia, we're going to enroll in Virginia, and we want to get in the game. Virginia is offering a program where they're going to give us a tax credit if we enroll, and we feel comfortable with Virginia since they have the largest 529 program right now in the country. We want to get into the game, but I realize that this is so new in our country. There are so many programs that are being offered, and I think we're going to see them evolve in time. We're going to get in at the ground level, and our investment choice will probably mimic our family's investment choices with our retirement accounts and savings accounts. But just getting in there and getting started, I think, is a great benefit for us, and it is a simple process to do that. And once we get in, I think that we'll look at the programs being offered state by state to see what matches Natalie's needs in the long term. But right now, we're looking at this for long-term investments. She's not probably going to look at those funds for another 10 years. So we have time to sit and watch how these programs evolve from state to state. I think that every family's investment options are different, and there's so many choices for us to make. Also, your risk is a personal choice, and you don't have to take a lot of risk if you don't want to.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to be on the webinar today, and I want to say thank you to all our panelists. I think that was an incredible perspective on your experiences, not only on the investment side, but just, you know, a real live perspective on different circumstances and different considerations that, you know, plenty of people with disabilities and plenty of families out there are I think, interested in moving forward on these, but clearly still have questions. I mean, we've had our website up, Able National Resource Center, since March, and I think we've had around 350,000 visits to the website, which is just incredibly remarkable, and I think it's indicative of, one, and perhaps most importantly, the desire and the need for these types of accounts, but two, that there's still a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questions out there related to how ABLE funds will affect an individual's eligibility for publicly funded benefits, about who can contribute, about what the funds can be spent on. And as we get more and more of these questions, we try to knock them down. We try to hold these webinars to try and educate all ABLE-related stakeholders in an effort to get them as comfortable as possible in the ABLE space. So with that, I believe we have about 15 minutes, and I know that we have a lot of questions coming in, and I want to make sure that we try to address at least some of those questions. And I'd like to start out with a few that I'm seeing right now. A question, do I absolutely need to consult a financial advisor in order to open an ABLE account? So Mark, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I don't think there's any need that you necessarily have to consult a financial advisor to open an ABLE account, but I know Karen and Jen and Catherine all said the same thing, which is to use other accounts as a guide. So when they probably use those other accounts as a guide, they probably got some guidance from someone at some point. And so having somebody look at it independently, I think, is a good idea. And as we talked about, it's also important to think about how it's being used. And I thought the comment that Alex made was outstanding, because his quote was, "I learned to be frugal." And as a financial planner, that's what I work on every day with clients, to make sure they're saving enough money to make sure they're going to be okay. In many cases, for parents, is that their child can be okay when they're gone. So, you know, to build a savings program, to know that it can be earnings from that particular child to do it. So I think that, you know, all the times, you know, associated, you know, referring back to a professional that has experience in that area could be helpful, but it's not necessary.
Thank you. John, I have this question I'm going to shoot over to you. We have somebody that says, I can only afford to contribute $25 a month to an ABLE account. Given that I cannot get anywhere near the $14,000 limit, is there any value to set up an account?
Of course. I think what it really does, it means you're beginning to get a habit of saving money. So $25, if they accept $10 a minimum, whatever it is, you're beginning a process which will hopefully be a lifetime process to be able to put some money aside for a future need.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think a lot of folks, and I get that question a lot, you know, I don't have a lot of money to contribute. What's the use? Should I even bother? And certainly we always encourage folks to open these accounts if they're eligible and contribute as much as they can.
I'll add on to that. You know, I do a talk on finding goal for special needs families, and as many people have said here, you can get other people to contribute too. So that's a good start. Hey, I'm putting money aside, and what about, you know, my parents or grandparents to the child? Do they want to help? And before you know it, you're really building something powerful. So once you start and put the hole in the dam, and all of a sudden money's starting to come in, it can come in from all different types of places.
Yeah, Mark, I think that's an excellent point. That's very good to remember that anybody can contribute into these accounts as much or as often, I should say, as they like, provided that that all the contributions in any given tax year do not exceed $100,000. I read that there's another question. I can field this one. Asking about overall caps. I know that there's rumors out there that the accounts aren't allowed to go over $100,000. The accounts have a account limit that is equal to whatever the state in which they've enrolled in their 529 college savings account limit, and that's typically anywhere between $300 all the way up to, I think there's one state that's $550,000 or $500,000, I think, which is Michigan. Obviously, it's going to take some time to get there at $14,000 a year, but that's the cap. This $100,000 cap, which is important to understand, refers to able beneficiaries, so able account owners, who are also beneficiaries of supplemental security income. So that's that monthly cash benefit, SSI. And that, and how ABLE interacts with that is what it says is when the account goes over $100,000, that SSI cash benefit will be suspended until such time as the account falls back below $100,000. So that being said, there's a question here. If my account exceeds $100,000, then my SSI cash benefit will be temporarily suspended. If I want the account to stay under $100,000, what could I do to prevent going over in terms of my investment options? So that's a good question. So Mark, you want to take a stab at that?
So you could definitely take your investment options if they're earning too much and put them in something that's more conservative. But the other side of it is, which is one of the huge benefits of ABLE, is it can be used for lots of different expenses. So the other side would be to increase your expenses, or to maybe take expenses from the ABLE Act account that you haven't been taking. And one of the bigger ones would be housing. So that would probably fix that particular problem.
Great, great. We have a question here that obviously comes up a lot, and I want to make sure that it's addressed. What happens to funds left in an ABLE account when the beneficiary passes away? So this is a very important element of ABLE to understand, and what kicks in is called a Medicaid payback provision. And what that provision basically says is any money left in an ABLE account once the beneficiary, the person with a disability, passes away, absent any pending qualified expenses, including burial and funeral expenses, is subject to a claim by the state Medicaid agency that's providing Medicaid supports and services to that individual. So if the individual is receiving supports and services through Medicaid, which many ABLE beneficiaries will be, not necessarily all, but many will be, then that state is keeping track of how much those services cost. And when that individual passes away, they're going to add up all those expenses from the time in which the account was opened through the death of the beneficiary, and they can file a claim with the ABLE account program to be reimbursed those funds by using the funds that are left over in the ABLE account. That's called a Medicaid payback provision. So it's important to note that ABLE is a great tool. It has a lot of tax incentives for growing through investment choices and things like that. But if you're really looking for more of a wealth transfer type of vehicle, ABLE may not be the best way to go. And this is just another example of how perhaps a special needs trust and an ABLE account can coincide and work together to offer additional benefits. Okay, let's see. What else do we have here? Again, we've talked about the ability to roll over one account from one program to another program. That is certainly allowed. However, each state does reserve the right to charge a fee for that type of transfer. As I know it currently, there's no states that actually will charge a fee for that, but that is something you might want to look into. If you know that you're just kind of buying time before your state launches, then you would want to make sure that before you enroll in a program, kind of your waiting program, you would want to make sure that there's no fees or there's no significant fees associated with rolling that over into your state once your state does in fact launch their ABLE program. Let's see here, looking for some additional questions. I also want to give our executive director an opportunity to see if he has any questions. I know that he is joined. Michael, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Chris. The webinar's been outstanding. Can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to come back to this whole issue of fees, and Mark, you gave a great example over a period of time, you know, in a particular investment. If a person didn't really pay attention to the administrative fees, it caused a loss of, you know, the differential was over $150,000. I know so often the ABLE programs that have opened talk about fees in terms of basis points. Can you explain that a little bit more and put that in sort of layman's terms?
So basis points just basically are percentage points. So they're telling about, you know, 2 or 3 basis points is 0.2 of 1%. So they try to make it confusing, I always say, in my business and ununderstandable to most people, but that's all it really means. So generally speaking, when most of the plans I've looked at that have indexes, they maybe 2 or 3/10 of a percent or 2 or 3 basis points. So that's how you look at it.
Okay.
Small amount.
All right. And then one other question is, as we look across the 5 states that have opened ABLE programs, and we do expect the consortia headed up by the state of Illinois with Pennsylvania, Alaska, Rhode Island, and many other states potentially to be opening by the end of this year, people are going to have even more choices than ever before. Each state has to follow the federal rules in terms of who is eligible, the maximum amount of money you can put in per year, regardless of how many contributors, $14,000 a year. So really, it often is coming down in discussions as I talk with people who are ABLE eligible, is back to this question of investment choices. If I'm going to ask this question of both John and Mark, if you know, everyone wants something to be simpler, that is really have a lot of factors. That's what both of you talked about. But if you were to try to boil it down, this may be an unfair question, to 3 criteria in assessing investment choices, what would be the 3 criteria you would look at and help the people on this webinar from across the country?
I would say the first criteria is time, when a person needs to access the money. Second would be risk tolerance, how willing you are to take risk to reach your long-term goals. And the last one would be your own personal financial situation at that time. Because if your own personal financial situation is a case where you really don't have access to adequate cash for emergency need, I think perhaps you're not in a position to take on that risk, that you need the time to really have an investment reach its full potential.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree 100% with John. Those are 3 top ones. I mean, the only other picture I'd add is look at the full picture. And it's been talked about here a number of times. You know, ABLE is one piece of the pie. And in order to assess your entire situation, you need to look at the entire pie. And as I mentioned earlier, I mean, I do lots and lots of talks every year on this subject, and the number one concern for almost every family with special needs is what happens to their child or their adult child at some point when they're gone. and do you have enough saved, or is there enough put aside so your child's going to be okay? And that's what really comes down into the planning part of it.
Okay. And perhaps, I don't, maybe we can squeeze it in. I'm going to come back across to our guests, and if you are each at this point able account owner, you have enabled an able account to be open. You're either an owner or you're a contributor to an able account for one of your own children. If you had one piece of advice for this vast audience that have joined us today from across the country, Karen, in terms of picking investment choices, one quick set of, recommendation to the audience.
Well, I would say similar to, I can't remember if it was Mark that stated, look at your other investment options and see, your other investment vehicles, whether it's retirement, whether it's 401k, whether it's 529, and see if that doesn't match what you feel like for your ABLE account. Set your, look at your goals, see when you're going to need to use those funds, and just go from there.
Okay, and Jennifer, any additional advice?
For us, it was really just looking at that. What are our long-term goals? Where is he going to be? And we knew we could be a little bit more aggressive, and we wanted a balance between stocks and bonds. But really going at it as a novice, we're going to try to see how things shake out this year, what the growth is like, and then readjust probably in about 6 months or so after the account's open.
Okay, and Alex, how about you?
I think Alex had to leave early.
Alex had to leave. Catherine, still with us?
Yes, I'm still here. I think that just get into the game. Start small. Just put away what you can. And when I mentioned nickels and dimes, we needed a place to put money that people gave Natalie for gifts, for holidays. Put that aside and keep it for her future. So it's not a huge amount of money. It's a small amount. Just use that to get started.
Fantastic. All great advice. And Chris, let me take it back to you to finish up.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think that's about all the time we have. I know that we had a great deal of questions in the queue, and we're going to take those, analyze them, and hopefully do post a frequently asked questions, parentheses, investment questions, up on the website within the next couple of weeks, and we'll get that out to folks via our social media. And I encourage folks to go to the website and sign up for our ABLE alerts so that you can get the most recent information in terms of different resources we're developing, the launch of different programs, things like that. We've had Mark and John's contact information up on the screen there. Again, you can access this entire presentation, the entire webinar, in accessible formats in about a week when we get it back up archived on the website. I want to thank them for offering their expertise to the webinar, and I certainly want to again say thank you to our very distinguished panel for offering their perspectives and for contributing their time and talents and experience towards helping this piece of legislation become law. We also have information if you need to contact us here. You can contact me. My email is up there. You can also submit questions through our online portal. I'd be more than happy to get back to you by emailing me or submitting questions through the website. And with that, I think it was a great, excellent webinar. Thank you to our presenters, panelists, and thank you to all of those out there who registered and tuned in. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.